Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
When I first got the idea that I was going to buy rental properties, literally every single person that I knew thought it was a horrible idea, that I would lose money and it would be a huge headache. But it turned out to be one of the greatest things I ever did. David, when you decided to start buying rentals, did you find that people were pretty supportive?
So I remember my first property that I had actually purchased, and it was in 2009, and everyone had said, now's not the right time to buy. Don't do that. My parents, my accountant, everybody was anti me buying a home. And they would say, what if everything goes wrong? And my answer to them was, well, what if everything goes right?
That's a good point. So tell me what the rentals have done for you today, cash flow wise. What does your portfolio look like?
Yeah, so I have 18 doors total, and they have provided a runway for financial freedom. We bring in a little bit over $30K a month in gross, and profiting after expenses is a little bit over $13K. I took $130,000 down payment and turned it into a $4.5 million portfolio.
It's a good thing David didn't listen to those naysayers. He would have missed out on building a lot of wealth. Well, on the podcast today, we're going to figure out how he did this, how he went from being brand new, knowing nothing about rental properties, to where he is today. Joining us on the show from Denver is David Miller. We'll take a really quick break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to David. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property. And when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs, and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more, or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056.
Rental Income Podcast.
David, let's start things off talking about your portfolio today. What does your portfolio look like?
Yeah, so today I have 12 long-term doors. I have 5 medium-term rental doors, and I have 1 primary home that also doubles as a short-term rental. So in total, 18 doors.
18 doors. Okay. And what got you first interested in doing this?
I used to work in television production, and I was in a production van. And I was sitting next to an audio guy who was in his 60s. And we started up a conversation, and I was asking him about his career and projects he's worked on. And he had a really decorated production career, having done quite a few films and commercials and TV shows. And the one thing I noted when talking to him was that he felt pretty stressless. And I was curious about that. Nothing really seemed to bother him. And he just had this like sort of air of confidence about him. And when I pressed him a little bit, he turned around and he kind of told me that he didn't really need to work in production. He just loved the energy of it and being around younger people. And when I pressed him a little bit more, it came out that he said he didn't need to do this. And the reason was that he had bought a bunch of brownstones that cash flowed for him. And that's really what provided him his lifestyle. And man, Dan, something about that just planted a seed inside me in my young 20s where I was like, okay, this guy figured something out. I want to do something like this in the future when I could.
Yeah, really just kind of reframes life. Like that's pretty cool. So then what did you do? I mean, it sounds like you were living in New York at the time. That's a very expensive place to buy real estate. Like what did you do? How did you get started?
Yeah. So, my real estate began in 2009, and actually it began about 7 years before then. I was saving up money as much as I could, knowing that one day I would want to have a down payment when the timing felt right. So I was working production, saving, money. Production, if you're not familiar, is kind of like you work off a day rate. So if you work that day, you get paid the amount that you agreed upon, and that's it. You wash your hands of the project at the end of the day. And I had worked on a few cool projects in production. And 2009 was kind of like where everything met at once. We had the financial crisis happen. Everyone was saying it was a bad time to buy. And ultimately I was sitting on $130,000 down payment that had taken me years to save up. And I was like, this feels like the time to buy. And I can't, and despite what everybody else was saying, it made sense to me in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of crazy when you think about it, that looking back on it, 2009 was the perfect time to buy real estate. But at the time, it didn't feel like it. Like, that was a scary time where prices were going down and nobody knew if they were going to keep going down forever. Um, it almost felt like the end of the world back then.
Big time.
So you decided to get started. So what did you end up buying?
A beautiful 1,000 square foot loft in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to afford an apartment like this in the future, Dan, but it was one where like the elevator opened into the apartment. It was so quintessential New York. 15-foot ceilings. It was really stunning. And it was actually listed as a 1-bed, 2-bath. The caveat to that is that there was actually an open loft on one side, and then there was an entire room area, open area for a second loft if I wanted to just build a little platform. So in my head, even back then, I remember looking at this place and I was like, okay, if I were to live downstairs in the 1 bedroom and I walled off that other loft upstairs, that could be a second bedroom. And then if I was able to build a platform and put a temp wall there, that could be a 3rd bedroom. So in my mind, I was looking at a 1-bed, 2-bath as a 3-bed, 2-bath.
So you turned this into a house hack.
That's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
I turned it into a house hack. I made sure I was within regulation and we had egress in the loft, which we did. And I ended up getting 2 different renters. And for the next decade of ownership, I would have a revolving door of friends, of friends of friends, of Airbnb guests, and ran the home like this pretty open space for people to come and live. And it was a phenomenal way to spend my 20s and early 30s in New York.
Were you able to live for free, or did the rents just kind of cover a part of the mortgage?
So the rents covered a decent amount of the mortgage. So I wasn't living free, but I certainly was. I reduced my cost of living tremendously. I want to say maybe I was living between $500 and $1,000 a month, and it would have been way more than that for this apartment.
So then, how did you turn that property into the portfolio that you have today?
And I moved to Colorado. I ended up living in Boulder for the first year. And then I put money down on a second home, which is my current primary in Denver. And that was in 2016. From there, I ended up living in that Denver place as well as using it as a short-term rental. So I was starting to learn the short-term rental game a little bit more there in Denver. And fast forwarding from there, I ended up in 2019, I got this weird gut instinct mid-year, probably around April or May, that something needed to change in the Brooklyn place. There was nothing wrong with it. It ran well. Everyone was happy. But I got this weird like instinctual hit that was like, you have to sell Brooklyn. So there was a ton of equity in it at that point, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna go spend a month or two there. And one of the roommates had moved out, so I had an open space to go spend a month or two. And in that time, I was like, yep, it's time to sell. And I can't tell you why, but I think it'll inform a little bit more as we go along the story here. I ended up chatting with the roommates. We agreed on an exit date for everyone. So I worked around everyone's schedules and ended up getting a real estate agent down there that we listed the apartment. And very quickly, we were under contract and everything was moving forward in a great way. We were on schedule to close on that apartment in December of 2019. Within a few weeks of selling that apartment, my real estate agent was like, hey, have you ever heard of Atlas Real Estate in Colorado? And I hadn't. And she's like, well, I think you'd get along with the owner there. I'd love to make an intro. So she did. And, I had gone back to Colorado. I met with one of the owners of Atlas. we sat down and I was like, whoa, I like what these guys are doing. And to give you some context, they invest in multifamily C-class properties. And I loved what their model was. They put me in contact with their head of sales. I sat down with him. We had a phenomenal chat. And within, I'd say 2 conversations, Dan, they completely inverted my investing ethos. I had gone from previously in my mind thinking, oh, well, maybe over the course of my life, I'll buy 5 A-class properties. And it's shifted from there to, I'm going to sell this Brooklyn place. I'm going to 1031 it, which I didn't even know what that was before meeting these guys. And then we're going to take all the deferred cap gains and we're going to invest it into as many multifamily doors as we possibly can in Colorado.
That's great. All right, so you sold the property. You had owned the property for 10 years. Like, so it's building up equity. How much equity did you have in the property when you sold it?
So I had purchased that condo for $610,000 with that $130K down, and I ended up selling it for $1,145 a decade later.
Wow!
So we ended up with $691K in cap gains.
Wow. Okay, so 691, and then that was your down payment then for the properties in Colorado.
Exactly. Yeah. So we basically we figured out if we can put 25% down on X amount of properties, we will be able to pick up 4 quadplexes and 1 5-plex.
Okay, so that's 17 units. So that one condo in New York turned into 17 rentals in Colorado.
Isn't that wild?
It really is. So
it still gets me.
So then cash flow wise, what did that do? Like, so when you actually ended up selling the condo in New York, was that making any money at that point?
It was making a bit. It was making a decent amount, not enough to live off of, but it was enough to like cover, let's say, utilities and some of my cost of living in Denver, but it was offsetting its own mortgage and then putting a little bit more in the bank.
Like maybe 1,000 or
maybe
okay.
About 1,000. Yeah, actually that's exactly it.
Okay.
It was about $1,000 a month extra that it was kind of, helping subsidize some of my life.
Okay. And then with the 17 units, like if everything goes right with those units every month, how much profit should they make?
So total profit for all the properties, we are bringing in $30,425 after expenses, and maintenance and upkeep. We subtract that from the debt threshold. We're bringing in about $14,938.
Wow! I mean, that's such a no-brainer move.
Yeah,
to sell
massive.
that property and buy the ones in Colorado. Now, you said that this company specializes in C-class properties, and it sounds like the property in New York would maybe be considered like an A-class property.
Totally. Yep.
Okay.
That was a big sort of shock for me, especially when I started looking at the inspection reports. I had an A-class property mined. And jumping into C-class was definitely shocking. And just a different strategy. But I got it. I understood what they were doing. And I understood how I could enter that game in a way that still aligned with me ethically as an owner and still enjoy sort of the numbers and how everything works in it.
So how is it different?
Yeah. So, I would say, I could answer that just from the perspective of what working with different residents is like. I do have professional management, but I would say in the C-class, there's more challenges when it comes to at times rent collection. I've had residents who, I've kind of seen a lot in the last several years here. Residents who might just pick up and leave and not tell your property management. And there are some phenomenal residents as well. It's not all that, but it's definitely different than sort of the A-class experience I had where there's a lot of communication. There's, I'd say, more reliability in rent collection, and less stress in that regard. And I think that's important to know because you're kind of getting a mixed bag. And it's not to say this can't happen in A-class. It just hasn't been my experience. It's a little bit different. Tenant screening has become a really important part of sort of my business model. And when talking with the team and the property managers, it's really important who you get into your home. We offer clean, safe, affordable, upgraded housing in return for a reliable rent. That's how I kind of view our contractual agreement with the residents. And I know that I always hold up my end of the bargain, and sometimes it's not reciprocated, but it's also, it's part of the model.
So it's a little bit more work and more hassle, but I mean, it's way more profitable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Certainly if you're comparing, the long-term rent of one unit versus the long-term rent of 17. Absolutely.
Right.
The wealth generation, they're on two completely different planes here.
Now, timing wise, it sounds like you hit this purchase right, but it wasn't smooth. So you bought this property in early 2020.
That's right. Yeah. The 1031 sale was in December. We had our 45-day window to identify the replacement properties. And then we closed on these 4 properties, essentially the beginning of 2020. So January, February, and then mid-March was my final signing of the 5-unit building. And then 1 week later, COVID hit.
Yeah. So was that a tough time? Like, going into these buildings right as all the shutdowns are starting?
Dan, I don't even I don't even know if I fully have the words to express and I'm not a panicker, but I definitely felt the anxiety rise when we started getting the news in that we had a virus coming across the seas. And I was like, oh God, like I've made either the best or worst decision of my financial life here. And it was so uncertain.
Yeah.
And I know that happens in real estate and any sort of investing, but man, this was just, I was in a space where I was like, well, we're going to have to see what happens. And I will say, to Atlas's credit, they are great at pivoting. They immediately hired somebody, a brand new position that could communicate with all of the residents that they were managing at that time to help them with all the programs that were coming out for rent assistance. And they really were on top of it. And that gave me great confidence for where we were in
financially. How did everything work out? Like, did you have a lot of tenants leaving or not paying?
So it was a mix. We had some residents hunker down. We had some residents move and go back home. But financially, I think out of the 17 doors in that first year, I had 8 residents move voluntarily. Whether it was, I don't know what their personal situations were, but I imagine it was to be back with family. So what that meant for me as a first time owner was I had 8 turnovers to do right off the jump. And in that first year, that basically depleted all of my resources that I had saved up. And each turnover at the time was anywhere between 8 to 12K per door. And I don't know if that's a lot, compared to what's happening around the country. It's just kind of what the prices were for basic upgrades. But it was a huge hit right off the bat. And even more so, Dan, that's where I was like, like, I don't know. I don't have many more of these in me.
Right.
And the one thing I will say that I did, and we can chat about this to sort of future proof that problem, was one of the banks that I had a loan with was offering a HELOC, a 10-year HELOC. And I jumped on that immediately. If for nothing else, just to have this line of credit sitting on the sideline, if people couldn't pay rent or if I had more turnovers. And so I secured a HELOC immediately, basically within the same week of signing the loan, I secured a HELOC.
Yeah, that's so smart. I mean, just having that backstop of extra money you can go to just to stay in the game, I think is really important. Now, the thing with real estate is sometimes there's tough times, but if you fight through it, things always get better. Just like in 2009, you were buying that first property as the world was falling apart. 2020, the world's fallen apart again, but we eventually got through that and prices have skyrocketed. So making it through COVID and hanging in there, how has that benefited you?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question. And I'm 100% with you. There are always going to be tough times. And I would even widen out in life in general. We're always going to have peaks and valleys. And in real estate specifically, if you can hold on, if you can figure out a way to get your debt threshold paid, even if you're breaking even, you're not cash flowing, if you can just sustain some of those valleys, I believe on the other side of that, at least historically, you will be okay. And even the example that you just shared with the 2009 purchase. So I had purchased that place for 610 grand. The seller had purchased it only 2 years beforehand for 675. So I know that they took a huge hit, and I don't know what their situation was, but had they been able to just rent it or hold out just a little bit longer, they could have very well doubled their profits.
Right. Yeah. It's just about hanging in there. So
hanging in.
So then how much appreciation have you seen?
Yeah, across the 17 doors that we picked up, as well as the primary, we've gone up probably around $2 million.
That's incredible. All right. So you've created $2 million in equity, and then your cash flow after all the expenses is over $13,000 a month.
That's right. Yep. Absolutely.
Now, with that equity sitting there, are you ever tempted to tap into that to continue to grow your portfolio? Kind of like you did with the New York property. You sold that and used that equity to get where you are today. Do you see that $2 million as a bridge to go someplace further? Or are you content with where you are today?
So if I do nothing else, here's what projections look like. Every year, I'll pay down $67,000 in debt reduction towards my principal. That happens right now every year. Every year, I'm gaining about 126K in appreciation, and that's at like a modest 2 to 3% assumption. Every year, I'm cash flowing between that 140 to 180. Really, it depends on vacancies, any deferred maintenance hits, and things like that. But that's kind of the range of where the positive cash flow is. So I kind of did some calculations in total wealth income creation, and that's, between your debt reduction, appreciation, and cash flow. In the next 10 years, we'll have generated $3.9 million across the portfolio.
That is really,
and in 10 years, it'll be around 6 million, of which 4.5 is equity.
That is really incredible. And, we didn't touch on this earlier, but I think this might be a good time to bring it up. You didn't come from money. Like, this is something that you figured out. Can you tell us a little bit about your background just to put this all in perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a first generation American immigrant. My mom is from France, off the boat. My dad was from South Africa, same thing. They actually met in Mexico, which is kind of funny. So we have a very multicultural family, and they moved to America to start their life, and this is where we began. And we did not grow up in a household with financial literacy. A lot of love and a lot of focus on education and open communication, but we didn't know how to make the money part work. That would come later on in life, as we're sharing here. But yeah, that's where the sort of humble beginnings began. And I always knew that we could do something big. I didn't know how to make it happen. And even in my career choice in production, it had been I was working, in production as on a day rate, and I never thought about having money to make money work for you and grow. And that's really changed my trajectory and my life and my investing ethos. So much so that we've actually, part of my mom's retirement plan is we bought her a quadplex, My sister has a quadplex. Like, we've all sort of invested and grown out of this to help build a bigger future for the futures behind us.
What an inspiring story. And it really goes to show you don't need to do dozens and dozens of deals to make a lot of money in real estate. When you think about it, David really did 2 transactions. He bought that first property in New York. And when he sold that, he bought a couple of properties in Denver, but it was all kind of the same transaction. Just really incredible what's possible with real estate. Well, if anybody is investing in the Denver area, David is also a realtor, and he would be happy to connect with you. I've got his contact information on the website. You can track it down at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 487. I'd like to thank Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group for sponsoring today's episode. If you're looking to buy a rental property, whether you're just getting started or you want to add to your portfolio, reach out to Chaley. She's got a ton of different loan programs, and she can find something that'll work for you in your situation. If you want to find out more or you want to set up a time to talk to Chaley personally, you can track her down at ridgelendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. Make sure you hit the follow button on whatever podcast app you're listening to the show on, and that way you'll get notified when the next episode comes out. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.